In around 538 BCE, the Persian king Cyrus the Great, who had just conquered Babylon, Mesopotamia, allowed the Jews to return to their homeland, the land of Israel, and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. 48 years earlier, the Babylonians had conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and exiled many of the Jewish elite to Babylon. In 520 to 515 BCE, Darius I, Cyrus II's son, promoted the completion of the temple, siphoning off taxes farmed in Syria for this purpose. This is how the Old Testament describes the relationship between Persia and the Jews some 2,500 years ago. Today, Iran, as Persia has been called since 1935, is orchestrating the ongoing region-wide assault on Israel, whose ultimate aim is the country's total destruction. Israelis regard Iran as the head of an octopus whose tentacles, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi rebels of Yemen, and Islamist militias of Syria and Iraq, are trying to squeeze the life out of the Jewish state through an open-ended war of attrition. So, what changed? The short answer is Islam, which was imposed on Iran during the 7th century Arab conquest of the country. In the Middle Ages, local Iranian Muslim dynasties replaced the ruling Arab outsiders, but Islam, with a strong anti-Semitic theological strain at its core, remained the religion of almost all Persians. The 1979 revolution in Tehran entrenched fundamentalist Islam as the governing ideology of the country, which was renamed the Islamic Republic of Iran, with Ayatollah Khomeini as its supreme leader. Khomeini was a vicious anti-Semite and made the destruction of Israel one of the regime's main foreign policy goals. It has remained a major regime objective under Khomeini's successor, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. In September 2015, Khamenei declared, "As long as the stinking wound and infected gland called the Israeli government, i.e. Israel, is in the heart of the Islamic territories, we cannot feel we have won." Khamenei was echoing what Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, Iran's president from 1989 to 1997, the second most important man in the Islamic Republic, had said a few years earlier. Israel is a malignant cancer gland that needs to be uprooted. On the 14th of December 2001, at Tehran University, Rafsanjani also said that the use of even one nuclear bomb inside Israel will destroy everything, i.e. Israel can easily be eradicated through one single nuclear strike. One of Rafsanjani's successors, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, president from 2005 to 2013, echoed this sentiment, saying Israel should be wiped off the map. In November 1947, Iran's UN delegation voted with the Arab states against the General Assembly Resolution 181, opposed the partition of Palestine and the establishment of a Jewish state alongside an Arab one. And 2 years later, Iran voted against Israel's admission to the United Nations. But by March 1949, Iran already had a foreign ministry official, Abbas Segal, who spent time in Israel sorting out consular affairs, and in March of the following year, Iran accorded Israel de facto recognition, partly as a result of bribes paid to Iranian officials, and allowed the presence of non-diplomatic, i.e. Mossad, representation in Tehran. Developments which, by the 1970s, had blossomed into full-fledged diplomatic relations. From the early 1950s onwards, Israel courted the non-Arab Middle Eastern states and the non-Muslim and non-Arab minorities in Arab lands as potential allies in what it called the peripheral policy. Thus, it sought good relations with Turkey, Ethiopia, and the Christians of Lebanon and South Sudan, Iraq's Kurds, and Iran. The establishment of good relations with Iran was to be a slow process, but Iran's new Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who ruled the country from 1953 to 1979, was eventually game. While firmly autocratic, Mohammad Reza was also a Francophile, bent on westernizing and modernizing his country. He regarded Islam as backward-looking and primitive and sought to restore ancient Persian greatness through secularization and modernization. He described Cyrus the Great as one of the most dynamic men in history and regarded the years of Arab rule as backward. Iran became Israel's chief oil supplier. Today it is Azerbaijan. Israeli companies were invited to run major Iranian infrastructure projects, and Israeli-Iranian defense ties flourished, including, it was reported, Project Flower, a joint venture to build a long or medium-range missile. Iranian army and security service officers were secretly trained and occasionally advised by Israelis in both Israel and Iran. Word of this eventually leaked out, and many Iranians turned against Israel because of the country's reportedly close ties with Savak, the Iranian secret police, who often carried out extrajudicial killings and torture of opposition figures. But the Shah's days were numbered. In late 1979, Mohammad Reza and his aides underestimated the groundswell of opposition among many sectors of the Iranian public, including religious fundamentalists, liberals, and leftists. The cancer-riddled Shah and his army and security forces failed to respond to the mass protests forcefully enough, and the regime collapsed. The Shah fled to Cairo, where he died shortly afterwards. Khomeini returned from exile in Paris a hero, declared an Islamic republic, arrested and killed thousands of the Shah's people, and then went on to crush his own erstwhile liberal and leftist allies. Khomeini dubbed the US the Great Satan and Israel the Little Satan, rescinded Iran's recognition of the Jewish state, and handed over its embassy to the PLO. Israel's diplomatic and security personnel escaped by the skin of their teeth. Khomeini was preparing to launch a pan-Muslim anti-Israel crusade, but history intervened. Iraq attacked Iran, which started a bitter 8-year war that cost at least 1 million Iranian lives. The Iranian army retaliated by launching human wave attacks, even sending children to clear minefields on foot. And Iran was willing to buy weapons from anyone who was selling them, even the great and little devils. The secret deals that resulted were later known as the Iran-Contra affair. Starting in 1981, the US sold Iran spare parts and small quantities of weapons. In the mid-80s, Israel was roped in. It shipped hundreds of US-made TOW anti-tank missiles, shells of various calibers, and more than a dozen US-made Hawk anti-aircraft missiles to Tehran, together with spare parts for tanks and aircraft. Israel was recompensed with upgraded American weapons and with money and oil shipments from Iran. The US used some of the money paid out by Tehran to finance and arm the anti-Sandinista Contra rebels in Nicaragua, hence Iran-Contra. The devastating Iran-Iraq War ended in a draw in 1988. Khomeini died the following year. His successor, Khamenei, was cut from the same ideological cloth. He was a fundamentalist Muslim, anti-Western, anti-Semitic, and anti-Israel. During Khamenei's first decade in power, Iran stepped up its nuclear program, which had been initiated during the Iran-Iraq War, with an eye to combating or deterring Iraq. Israel became its ultimate target, but Tehran also contributed to conventional warfare against Israel by massively arming Hezbollah, especially with rockets, and by supplying arms to Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. During the 34-day mini-war of July-August 2006 between Hezbollah and Israel, triggered by the killing of 5 IDF soldiers on patrol along the Israel-Lebanon border, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, officers were seen directing Hezbollah troops in the use of sophisticated weapons. These included the Chinese-built surface-to-ship C-802 missiles that almost sank an Israeli Navy corvette, the Hanit, which had failed to activate defense measures. The 2006 war ended in a stalemate after the IDF ground forces invaded southern Lebanon but were stopped by Hezbollah anti-tank missile crews south of the Litani River. The international community ordered a halt to hostilities, and the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 called on Hezbollah to withdraw to the north of the Litani, away from the border with Israel, and to disarm. In October, the IDF withdrew from southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah, flouting the UN ruling, increased its armaments and slowly re-infiltrated the area. The reinforced UN border force, UNIFIL, that's the United Nations forces in Lebanon, failed to monitor or curb Hezbollah. What followed was a shadow war between Iran and Israel. Tehran began consolidating a ring of fire around Israel's borders. In 2009, it started to arm the Houthi rebels in northern Yemen and the Islamist militias in Iraq and Syria, and to send arms via Sudan and the Egyptian-ruled Sinai to Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza. The IDF periodically intervened. The Israel Air Force, IAF, destroyed truck convoys in Sudan bound for Hamas, and in 2012, the IAF destroyed a Sudanese plant purportedly manufacturing arms for the Gazan terrorist groups. In March 2011, the Israeli Navy captured a ship conveying Iranian arms from Syria to Gaza. From 2009 to 2023, Iranian weapons shipments to Hezbollah were repeatedly hit by the IAF after they had been offloaded in Syrian airfields. Despite Israel's efforts, Iran's strategy ultimately succeeded. Today, Hezbollah reportedly has 150 to 200,000 rockets of varying capabilities, some of which can reach as far as Dimona and Eilat in southern Israel. The various other Iranian proxies between Yemen and Iraq all have serious drone and rocket abilities. Alongside their efforts to interdict Iranian munitions, Israel unleashed a covert campaign against Tehran's nuclear project. Mossad chief Meir Dagan assured Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the project could be halted by the clandestine operations, which would enable them to avoid an all-out war. The late Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, once said that Dagan was an expert in separating an Arab from his head. Dagan's agents began assassinating Iranian nuclear scientists in Tehran. First to go was Masoud Ali Mohammadi, killed outside his home on the 12th of January 2010, allegedly by Jamil Fashi, who later confessed, according to the Iranians, that he had been trained by Mossad. Over the following years, 3 other Iranian scientists were killed and several more were wounded. Most were hit by motorcyclists who attached bombs to their cars. The last and most prominent to go was Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the head of the nuclear program, who was killed just outside Tehran while he was being driven to work on the 27th of November 2020. He died in a spectacular fashion, hit by a remote-controlled GPS-guided gun. His wife, who was sitting beside him, emerged unhurt. Iran later described Fakhrizadeh as a scientist who worked on COVID prevention. Mossad also organized the bombings of a number of installations connected to Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Apparently, with American help, Mossad managed to plant a virus known as Stuxnet in Iran's nuclear facilities, thereby severely damaging hundreds of centrifuges at the Natanz uranium enrichment plant. Israeli agents also sold the Iranians faulty equipment, which further set back the nuclear project. The Iranian security agencies proved no match for Mossad, but at the end of the day, the Israelis failed to halt either the nuclear project of Iran's development, and the Iranians retaliated. In 2011 to 2012, they sent teams of terrorists to kill Israeli diplomats around the globe, in Turkey, Azerbaijan, Thailand, the United States, Argentina, Georgia, and India. Almost all the plots were frustrated by Israeli and local security agencies. No diplomats died. The most serious and successful attack, possibly carried out by Hezbollah operatives working on behalf of Iran, occurred in Bulgaria in July 2012 when bombers hit an Israeli tourist bus, killing 6, including the Bulgarian driver. Iran's overarching policy goals remained constant. On the 3rd of June 2018, Supreme Leader Khamenei tweeted, "Our stance against Israel is the same stance we have always taken. Israel is a malignant, cancerous tumor in the West Asian region that has to be removed and eradicated. It is possible and it will happen." 3 years earlier, he had predicted that Israel will not see the end of these, i.e. the next 25 years. Iran continued to aim its proxies, including sporadic low-level attacks, rocketing, occasional terrorist infiltrations, designed to divert Israeli attention and resources away from the nuclear threat, and preparing for the fateful day when they would unleash a massive, multi-front conventional attack on Israel. The use of proxies allowed Tehran a degree of plausible deniability, and made it less likely that Israel would retaliate directly against Iran itself. At the same time, by massively arming Hezbollah, they deterred Israel from striking at Iran's nuclear installations before the bomb was ready. Then, on the 7th of October 2023, Hamas attacked southern Israel. The organization had spent a decade planning and preparing the attack, yet Israel's intelligence services had failed to realize what was afoot. The Hamas leaders played their cards close to their chests. They did not, it appears, give Tehran or Hezbollah prior warning of the planned date of the attack. But Hamas's leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, certainly expected Hezbollah to eventually join in, and Hezbollah did on the 8th of October. Since then, it has rocketed Israeli military targets from across the Lebanon-Israel border every day, forcing the Israeli government to evacuate 60,000 inhabitants from the settlements that hug the border. The evacuees remain in hotels and in relatives' houses to the south to this day. Hezbollah has announced that it will not cease fire until Israel ends its war in Gaza. Hezbollah's attacks on Israel were initially low-key, restricted to the area just south of the Lebanese border and to the northern Golan Heights, not the massive assault that Hamas and possibly Tehran had hoped for. Israel responded with daily artillery, air, and drone attacks on Hezbollah positions, often targeting specific commanders. Both sides tried to avoid civilian casualties and full-scale war, which everyone understood would devastate both Lebanese and Israeli population centers. Later that month, the Houthi rebels who control northern Yemen also joined the fray, rocketing the maritime traffic crossing in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Straits, and thus paralyzing Israel's southern port Eilat, and causing Egypt substantial loss of revenue by emptying the Suez Canal of shipping. The Houthis also sent periodic drones and rockets southwards towards Israel itself. Most were shot down by the US-led naval flotilla patrolling the Red Sea and by Israeli anti-missile batteries and aircraft. This was the situation until April 2024. Israeli ground and air forces pounded away at Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip, killing thousands of civilians as collateral damage, while most Hamas fighters hid in Gaza's vast underground tunnel system from which they barred the civilian population. The Western Naval Task Force in the Red Sea proved unable to reopen the Bab al-Mandab Straits and largely unable to halt the Houthi missile strikes against Israel. The Iran-backed militias in Syria and Iraq also fired occasional rockets and drones at Israel. But no one struck at Iran, although everyone understood that Iran was the orchestrator of this grueling mini-war of attrition. Over the period April to July 2024, the mini-war between Israel and the Iranian proxies gradually transformed into something approaching an open Israeli-Iranian conflict, and the threat of an all-out, full-scale war is now palpable. On the 13th of April 2024, the Iranians launched a mixture of 350 cruise missiles, drones, and ballistic rockets at Israel, mainly from Iran itself, but also from Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen. Only a handful of the weapons reached their targets. Israeli anti-aircraft and anti-missile defenses, assisted by American, British, French, and possibly Jordanian aircraft and radar systems, operating far from Israel's borders, shot down almost all the projectiles. Only a handful landed near or in an IAF base in the Negev, causing minor damage and no casualties. After days of deliberation, Netanyahu and his military aides, intent on avoiding direct confrontation, decided on a symbolic response. Israeli aircraft hit an AA missile batteries radar unit near Natanz rather than attacking a significant Iranian asset, such as the nearby Natanz uranium enrichment plant. Many Israelis criticized the government's response as weak-kneed and ineffective. The Iranians claimed that the massive missile barrage was designed to avenge an Israeli airstrike 2 weeks earlier on the 1st of April 2024 against an annex building in the Iranian embassy compound in Damascus. The strike killed Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Zahevi, commander of Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps units in Syria and Lebanon, who was orchestrating Iran's arms shipments to Hezbollah. 7 Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps officers and a dozen Hezbollah and other Iranian proxy militiamen, several embassy personnel died with him. 3 months later, on the 19th of July, the Houthis launched 5 upgraded Iranian-made Samad-3 drones toward Tel Aviv, 1,800 kilometers away. 4 were apparently down by US warships, but the 5th got through after flying over the Red Sea, Sudan, Egypt, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Because of its trajectory, Israel's anti-missile defenses failed to identify the drone as hostile. It exploded in downtown Tel Aviv, several hundred yards from the US consulate building. 1 Israeli died and 9 were wounded. Israel responded the following day with a massive air assault on the Houthi-held port Dar, through which most of Iran's weapons shipments reached the organization. The port was taken out of action. A week or so later, on the afternoon of the 27th of July, Hezbollah, ostensibly in response to an Israeli airstrike earlier that day in South Lebanon, in which 4 of its fighters died, launched a lone heavy Iranian-made rocket at the Druze village of Majal Shams, in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights at the foot of Mount Hermon. This may not have been its intended target. The rocket killed 12 Druze children aged 10 to 16 and wounded dozens more who were playing on the village's football field. The Israeli military insists that Hezbollah carried out the attack, that the rocket was fired from Hezbollah-controlled southern Lebanon, and that only Hezbollah possesses such rockets. Hezbollah has denied involvement in the rocketing, a lie no doubt prompted by optics. Given the large number of civilian casualties, the fact that they were all children, and the implications for their relations with the Druze community in Lebanon, as well as by fear of how Israel might respond. There has been a threat looming over every battle in the region over the past decades, especially since October 7, Iran's future possession of a nuclear bomb. The Iranian regime sees its future nuclear arsenal as a guarantor of its safety. Nobody, it reasons, will mess with the regime as the West did with Saddam Hussein of Iraq, once the regime has nuclear wherewithal to defend itself. Much of the United States has not ventured to seriously confront North Korea's Kim Jong-un, who continually brandishes his nuclear might. No doubt, Iran's leaders also see their future nukes as an umbrella under whose cover they will be able to safely continue their projects of terror and subversion against their enemies around the Middle East, including Israel, with relative impunity. Iran also certainly sees its future nuclear arsenal as a counterweight to Israel's own, and may, at what its leaders deem a good time, even use it to destroy the Jewish state while depending on Allah's goodwill to protect them from an Israeli or American counterstrike. In 2010 to 2012, Netanyahu seriously considered attacking Iran's budding nuclear installations, but apparently deflected by his military chiefs, including Defense Minister Ehud Barak, and deterred by his own fears, he scotched the idea. Instead, he put his trust in Mossad's clandestine sabotage efforts and in Western sanctions and diplomacy to stymie the Iranian nuclear project. And in 2015, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, together with Germany, the EU, and Iran, signed JCPOA, a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, severely restricting Iran's advance toward the bomb in exchange for a reduction in international sanctions against Iran. Netanyahu denounced the agreement as full of loopholes and contingent on Iran's good faith, which couldn't be trusted. Besides, after a 15-year-old regime of restrictions, the JCPOA allowed Iran to take up where it had let off and start directly working towards the bomb again. Netanyahu denounced the agreement on these grounds before President Barack Obama and a joint meeting of Congress in Washington, which severely strained Israel-US relations. In 2016, Trump was elected. Netanyahu persuaded the new president to pull out of the JCPOA, which he did in 2018. Trump also reimposed several severe economic sanctions on Tehran. The Iranians reacted by also pulling out of the agreement and by gradually speeding up their process towards the bomb. In recent years, they have been enriching uranium up to 60%, way beyond the 3.67% allowed by the JCPOA, and bringing them within an inch of the 90% needed to create fissile material. They have stockpiled sufficient enriched uranium for a small arsenal once they achieve 90% enrichment. Iran has also vastly improved its delivery capabilities, though it is unclear how it has progressed in the fields of miniaturization needed to affix a warhead to a missile and metallurgy. The American reluctance to use force, or the explicit threat of force, to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions is probably motivated by the American failures in Afghanistan and Iraq. Though all American presidents since Obama have vowed never to allow Tehran to acquire the bomb. Israel fears that American avowals will not deter Iran, and at the end of the day, Israel will stand alone. Most American and Israeli experts believe that Israel's air force acting alone is incapable of destroying the Iranian nuclear project or even substantially setting it back, especially now that the Iranians, who have learned from the Israeli destruction of Iraq's and Syria's nuclear reactors in 1981 and 2007 respectively, have dispersed their installations and tucked them deep underground. But experts in Washington fear that Israel may go ahead nonetheless, in the hope that an Israeli assault, even if unsuccessful, would draw in the Americans, who would then complete the job. And if they didn't, Israel would ratchet up the stakes and in a second strike, proceed to destroy the Iranian installations using its own nuclear weapons, thus plunging the world into terrifying unknown territory. Iran's alliance with Russia, which it has consolidated since the start of the Russian attack on Ukraine, since Iran now supplies Russia with most of its attack drones, and its allegiance with the Russian-Chinese nexus, raises the spectre of a Third World War prompted by an Israeli nuclear attack on Iran. Such a scenario may seem far-fetched, but it must certainly be on the minds of many leaders in both Russia and the West. But there are more immediate dangers. This week, it became clear that there is a far shorter path to an all-out conflagration in the Middle East. On the 30th of July, Israel responded to the massacre of 12 Druze children in Majal Shams with 2 air-launched missiles fired into the Dahia neighborhood of Beirut, where Hezbollah is headquartered. The target was Fuad Shukr al-Hajj Hussein, the organization's second-in-command, who, according to Israel, is ultimately responsible for the killing of the Druze children. Israel broadcast the attack, which it claims is a measured response to the massacre. Shukr was close to Hezbollah's Security General, Hassan Nasrallah. On the 7th of October 2023, Netanyahu publicly vowed that all the Hamas leaders connected to that day's massacre would eventually meet their maker, much as Washington vowed to get bin Laden after 9/11. And in the early hours of the 31st of July, another missile shattered a window of an apartment in distant downtown Tehran, killing Ismail Haniyeh and his bodyguard. Everyone believes that Israel is responsible. The missile may have been launched by an Israeli F-35 stealth bomber in coordination with Mossad operatives who were tracking Haniyeh. Haniyeh was the head of Hamas's political bureau and in effect the political head of the Gaza organization. For the past few years, he has been living in the safety of a 5-star hotel in Qatar, alongside other Hamas leaders. But on the 30th of July, he travelled to Tehran to attend the inauguration of Iran's newly elected president, and stayed overnight at an IRGC safe house. Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas have all announced that they will avenge the 2 assassinations. So now the Middle East appears to be on the verge of a major explosion, in which the handful of mini-wars may merge into a full-scale regional war, with terrifying implications. This essay was written by the Israeli historian Benny Morris and published in Quillette on the 1st of August 2024. It was read by me, Zoe Booth. You can read it at quillette.com.